Some men can build companies, but still fail at the one thing that actually matters.
Failure. That was the word my wife used for me at a black-tie charity gala, with a crystal glass in her hand and a smile on her face like she had every right to say it. Some men can build companies, she said, her voice soft enough to sound elegant and cruel enough to cut clean through bone, but still fail at the one thing that actually matters, giving their wife a child. There are moments in life when a room goes quiet all at once. Not because someone shouted, because somebody told a truth they think is safe to tell. Or worse, a lie they think no one can challenge. That was one of those moments. The ballroom of the Palmer House in downtown Chicago had been full of warm gold light just seconds earlier. String quartet near the stage, waiters sliding through the room with silver trays, donors in tuxedos and gowns smiling the way wealthy people smile when they think the night belongs to them. And then my wife, Lena, said that, not in private, not in the car on the drive home, not in one of those cold, controlled arguments where she knew exactly where to place the knife and how deep to turn it. No. She said it into a cluster of laughing guests at a charity gala for children's hospitals. While I stood beside her in a navy suit, she once told me made me look solid, if not especially memorable. A few people gave the kind of laugh people give when they don't know yet whether they're witnessing a joke or a cruelty. One man near the donor wall lowered his drink. A woman in emerald silk looked at me, then quickly away, and Lena, my wife of 9 years, tilted her chin just slightly and added, "It's a shame, really." I kept thinking prayer, money, specialists, time. Surely something would fix it. But some men are just not meant to be fathers. I did not answer her. That surprised people. Maybe they expected a scene. Maybe they expected me to defend myself. Maybe they expected the same thing Lena had expected from me for years, pain on demand. But pain had become an old language in our marriage, and I was tired of speaking it for other people's entertainment. So I stood there, calm enough to make her uneasy, and looked at the woman I had once loved enough to mistake for home. What nobody in that ballroom knew yet, not the donors, not the board members, not Lena's friends, not even the woman in emerald silk pretending not to listen, was that I had a folded envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket. And inside that envelope was the one medical report my wife had hidden from me 11 months earlier. The report that changed everything. The report that proved the problem had never been me. The report she had buried because the truth threatened the life she was building on my silence. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 41 years old. And until that night, I had spent almost 7 years carrying a shame that didn't belong to me. If you've ever sat in a room where someone else told your story wrong and you let them because you still love them too much to expose the truth, then stay with me. Because what happened after my wife called me a failure in that ballroom was not loud. It was not theatrical. It was not revenge in the way people imagine revenge. It was slower than that, cleaner than that. And by the end of the night, the lie she had built our marriage around was no longer standing. But to understand why that moment hit the way it did, I need to take you back to where the silence started. Not that night, not the report, further back. Back to the version of me who believed love and patience were the same thing. Back to the first apartment Lena and I rented together on the north side. Before the promotions, before the fundraisers, before the specialists and the tests and the quiet little humiliations that collect in a marriage, until one day they become the walls themselves. Back when I still thought being a good husband meant absorbing whatever pain the room needed me to absorb. Lena and I met 12 years earlier at a fundraising brunch for a literacy nonprofit. She was bright, polished, magnetic in the way some people are when they've learned young that charm can open doors effort alone cannot. I was already working in commercial development then, not glamorous work, but honest work, contracts, sites, permits, concrete schedules, steel delivery windows. The kind of life measured not in applause, but in whether something still stood where you built it 6 winters later. She told me once early on that I made her feel safe. I believed that was love. What I did not understand then was that some people confuse safety with utility. They love the shelter and never once ask what it costs the person holding the roof up. The first 2 years of our marriage were good enough to make me loyal and difficult enough to make me work harder. That combination can ruin a man if he isn't careful. When we started trying for children, I was hopeful in the ordinary way. We painted a spare room a soft, muted green. Lena laughed at me for buying a crib too early, but she laughed warmly then, with affection in it. I kept the screwdriver set on the dresser for 3 weeks because I liked the thought that at any moment I might get to build something small and permanent with my own hands. Month after month passed, then a year, then 2. And hope, if it isn't tended carefully, starts changing shape. It becomes appointments, calendars, time conversations, blood work, hormone panels, quiet drives home with the radio off. The first time a doctor suggested fertility testing for both of us, Lena squeezed my hand in the exam and smiled that brave little smile people wear when they know they're being watched. Whatever it is, she said, we'll face it together. I believed her then too. I believed a lot of things then. It started small, the way so many betrayals do. A comment at dinner with her sister. A joke at Christmas from one of her aunts about keeping Lena waiting. A long look from her mother after church that lingered on me just half a second too long. Then the private comments began. Do you think maybe your work stress has something to do with it? Have you ever wondered if all those years on job sites affected something? You know, men don't always realize when they're the issue, not accusations exactly, not at first. Just suggestions laid so softly that if you protested, you sounded defensive. And if you stayed quiet, the idea settled in the room like dust. I took every test they asked me to take. Blood tests, hormone panels, scans, samples delivered in sterile little rooms no man ever forgets. No matter how much dignity he tries to carry in with him, I never complained. Not because I was strong, because I love my wife and because I thought if pain had to land somewhere, it should land on me before it landed on her. That's what I thought being a husband meant back then. 3 years into trying, the language around us changed. Friends stopped asking directly and started using that pitying tone married people use when they suspect your family is not arriving on schedule. Lena got sharper, not always, not publicly, just in those private moments where nobody else could measure the damage. Like one Tuesday in November when I came home from a site meeting in Joliet, boots still dusted white from dried concrete, and found her sitting at the kitchen island with test strips lined up in the trash like little white flags of surrender. She didn't look at me when she said it. I'm so tired of building my life around disappointment. I stood there with my hard hat still in one hand. I remember setting it down gently on the counter, as if the care I showed an object might somehow restore some care to the room. I know, I said. And she turned then fast, eyes bright with anger and grief and something meaner than either. No, Daniel, she said. You don't know, because your body isn't the one keeping us here. She apologized later, cried even, said she was overwhelmed, said she didn't mean it the way it sounded. I forgave her because at that point, forgiveness had become less of a virtue and more of a reflex. That's the thing about repeated hurt inside a marriage. You stop measuring each wound on its own. You start measuring them by whether they are survivable. I survived many things in those years. I survived the way she would go quiet for entire weekends after failed cycles, then thaw just enough around other people to make me wonder if I'd imagined the cold. I survived her mother recommending another specialist over brunch and not meeting my eyes once. I survived overhearing Lena on the phone one night telling a friend, I just don't know how much more of this I can take. It's like loving someone and resenting them at the same time. I survived the prayer circles, the herbalists, the supplements lining our bathroom cabinet in neat, expensive rows, the whispered advice from women at church who always directed their sympathy toward Lena and their suspicion toward me. What I did not know, what I would not know for years, was that somewhere during all of that, the truth had already arrived, and my wife chose not to hand it to me. 11 months before the gala, we went to the Rowe Center for Reproductive Medicine for what Lena told me would be a routine follow-up. Their office sat on the 17th floor of a glass building overlooking the river, all pale wood and tasteful artwork, and the kind of silence expensive clinics charge extra to maintain. The specialist we saw that day was Dr. Naomi Feld, mid-50s, steady voice, no unnecessary warmth, which I actually appreciated. There's a certain mercy in a doctor who tells the truth without trying to make it pretty. Lena had received some additional diagnostic testing the week before, more invasive than mine had ever been. I remember asking that morning if she wanted me to drive. She said no, she wanted control of at least one thing that day. We sat in that office together while Dr. Feld reviewed a file on her tablet. Her face changed almost imperceptibly as she scrolled. Then she looked up at us, hands folded. "Mr. Mercer," she said, turning to me. "Your latest results are well within normal range." I still remember the way the room seemed to narrow. I looked at Lena. She looked at the doctor. No relief crossed her face. None. Dr. Feld continued, careful and clinical. "We're seeing some findings on Lena's side that may explain your difficulty conceiving naturally. There are treatment pathways we can discuss, some immediately, some more long-term. But based on what I see here, the primary concern is not male factor infertility." That was the sentence. The sentence that should have changed the trajectory of our marriage. The sentence that should have unburdened me. The sentence my wife later buried so thoroughly that for almost a year afterward, she still let entire rooms believe the problem lived in my body. But in that office, before I understood what I was seeing, Lena leaned forward and started asking questions rapidly, almost aggressively, about percentages, procedures, privacy, documentation, whether reports were available through the portal, whether supplementary notes could be held until the full follow-up, whether preliminary interpretations might be misleading. I remember thinking grief makes people strange. I remember reaching for her hand. She did not take mine in the parking garage afterward. She was silent all the way to level 4. Concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lights, the sound of our footsteps coming back to us sharper than normal. I turned to her beside the car and said the one thing I thought would finally bring us together again. "Lena," I said quietly, "it's not me. And I hate myself a little even now for the relief I heard in my own voice. Not because I had blamed her, I never had. But because after years of carrying that shame, there was a part of me, small, frightened, human, that wanted to put the burden down." She stared at me like I'd said something selfish. Then she looked away and unlocked the car. "Don't," she said. "Don't what?" "Don't make this about you feeling better. That should have told me everything." It told me nothing. Love can make a smart man slow. Over the next week, whenever I brought up the report, she redirected. Said Dr. Feld wanted more testing. Said nothing was definitive. Said fertility medicine was complicated and I was reducing it to a scoreboard because the one sentence I liked happened to favor me. Those were her words, favor me. As if truth were a team sport. As if marriage required us to protect whichever lie preserved the current emotional hierarchy. A few days later, I tried logging into the clinic portal to review the report myself. The password had been changed. When I asked Lena, she said the system must have glitched and that she'd call. She never did. Or if she did, she never said what happened. I should have pushed then. I should have called the office directly. I should have demanded my own records. I should have noticed that every time the subject came near the actual results, my wife became less wounded and more strategic. But shame does something to a person. Even after you're told it doesn't belong to you, part of you keeps carrying it because it has already shaped the way others look at you. And part of me still wanted to protect Lena from embarrassment. That may sound absurd now. It sounds absurd to me too, but marriage teaches some people to confuse self-erasure with compassion. The months that followed became stranger. Lena began speaking about our future in ways that made me feel less like a husband and more like a disappointing delay. At dinner one night with friends from her board, I heard her say with a little sad smile, "We're exploring all possibilities." You learn not every marriage gives you the family picture you imagined. A week later, in the car after brunch with her mother, she snapped because I had answered too vaguely when asked about next steps. "If people ask, just say we're still figuring things out," she said. "You don't have to look so wounded." I gripped the steering wheel and kept my eyes on Lakeshore Drive. "Why does it matter how I look?" She gave a bitter little laugh. "Because, Daniel, whether you realize it or not, people can tell when a man feels inadequate." I did not answer her then either. Silence had become my shelter, and maybe also my prison. 3 months after the doctor's appointment, I found a folded pamphlet in the trash beneath coffee grounds and orange peels. Not because I was snooping, because I was tying up the bag before taking it out. The front read, Donor Pathways, Building Families with Confidence and Discretion. I stood there in the kitchen holding it while the dishwasher hummed behind me. When Lena came in, she saw it in my hand and froze. I waited for her to explain. She didn't. Instead, she said, I picked that up at the clinic. They hand everybody those. Everybody, yes, you didn't mention it. Because it didn't matter, I looked at her for a long time. And what I remember most is not anger. It's how tired I felt. Like I had been trying to carry something that kept changing shape in my arms. Does it matter now? I asked. She crossed her arms. Do you want it to? There are marriages that explode. Ours eroded. Slowly. Cleanly. By the time the gala invitation arrived, we had become two polished adults performing the outline of a life that no longer had a center. The event was for the Bright Futures Children's Trust. Pediatric care. Long-term support for families with chronically ill children. Lena had joined the auxiliary board the year before. Publicly, it made sense. Elegant cause, high visibility donors, plenty of society coverage. Privately, I had been quietly supporting the Trust Family Housing Program for almost 6 years under a donor-advised structure that did not use my name. Lena did not know that. Not because I hid it from her intentionally, because she had long ago stopped asking about the things I gave that didn't improve a room she cared about. 2 days before the gala, I got a call at my eye office from Dr. Feld's assistant. I nearly didn't answer because I was reviewing site revisions for a municipal redevelopment project on the south side. Mr. Mercer, she said, Dr. Feld would like to know if you still require copies of your full file and the prior diagnostic reports. We had a note indicating future release upon direct request. I sat very still at my desk. I require all of it, I said. There was a pause. Then, of course, we can have a sealed packet ready by tomorrow afternoon. A sealed packet. A note indicating future release upon direct request. Something in me went cold. The next day, I picked it up myself. I did not open it in the clinic lobby. I waited until I was alone in my truck, parked beneath a row of bare October trees with the river flashing gray between buildings. Paper has weight when it contains the truth you've been denied. I opened the packet carefully. Inside were complete records. My results, Lena's results, doctor's notes, portal access changes, signed acknowledgement of patient receipt. And there, clipped to the second section, was the report from 11 months earlier, exactly as Dr. Feld had stated in the office. Male factor infertility not indicated. Primary fertility concern associated with findings in female partner requiring intervention and follow-up. Below that, in the doctor's typed notes, patient Lena Mercer requested restricted portal discussion until further consultation. Husband appeared unaware of extent of findings. Recommend joint disclosure discussion. Further down, another note from 3 days later. Patient called requesting wording clarification on preliminary summaries viewed by spouse. Advised records remain medically accurate and cannot be altered. And one more 2 weeks later. Portal credentials changed at patient request. Husband not listed on revised access. I read those lines 3 times. Then I sat in that truck for almost 20 minutes without moving. A man can prepare himself for betrayal in theory. The body still receives it like impact. What broke me was not that Lena had pain. Not that she struggled. Not even that she may have feared being seen differently if the truth came out. What broke me was that she let me keep wearing the shame in every room, at every family table, at every holiday. She let me stand there and carry it because it was easier for her than carrying her own. That is a particular kind of intimacy to violate. That night, I took the packet home and locked it in my office drawer. I did not confront her immediately. Not because I was weak, because once you know the truth, timing becomes part of dignity. And I wanted to understand whether Lena had only hidden a report, or whether she had built an entirely different life on top of that lie. The answer came faster than I expected. The night before the gala, I came home early from a contractor dinner and heard her in the sunroom, phone on speaker, back turned toward me. I caught only part of the conversation. I can't keep waiting forever, she said. A pause, then softer. No, he still doesn't know all of it. He suspects something, maybe. But Daniel always needs time before he sees what's right in front of him. I stood in the hallway like a man listening to the floor crack beneath him. Another pause. Then she laughed quietly. No, I'm not afraid of him making a scene. That's the one thing about Daniel. He'll suffer privately before he embarrasses anyone publicly. The person on the other end said something I couldn't hear. Lena answered, "Tomorrow will tell me what I need to know." She ended the call. I walked back out the front door before she saw me, then came in 5 minutes later making enough noise with my keys to announce myself. She looked up from the kitchen and smiled. "Long night." "Traffic," I said. I did not sleep much. The next evening at the gala, she wore silver. I remember that for reasons I can't fully explain. Maybe because silver catches light beautifully while giving away no warmth. Maybe because by then I had started seeing her as someone polished more carefully than honest. On the drive downtown, she touched up her lipstick in the visor mirror and asked if I had remembered the pledge card she wanted me to review later. I said yes. She asked if I planned to mingle more this time and not spend the whole evening talking to hospital administrators and construction donors like a city contract in a tuxedo. I told her I'd do my best to be less disappointing socially. She laughed, thought I was joking. By the time we arrived, the ballroom was already glowing. Gold ceiling panels, tall centerpieces of white orchids and candlelight. An auction display near the west wall, music low enough to flatter conversation. The sort of room designed to make generosity look glamorous. Lena was in her element. She moved through donors like she had been born understanding how to stand inside expensive air. I stayed close where necessary, distant where possible. We greeted board members. We posed for a photo. We exchanged all the usual polished lies married people exchange when they have learned how to function publicly while privately coming apart. At our table were 2 investors, a pediatric surgeon from Northwestern, Lena's board friend Camille, and a couple I vaguely recognized from some museum event the spring before. It was during cocktails before the keynote that Camille asked the question so lightly, so casually. "So?" Stirring her drink with one manicured finger. "Are you two still hoping for children? Or have you finally made peace with being those elegant globe-trotting adults who send very expensive holiday cards?" She laughed at her own line. The investors smiled politely, and Lena, without missing a beat, took a sip of champagne and said, "Hope is a luxury, Camille. At some point reality makes the decision for you." Camille blinked, slightly embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "It's fine," Lena said. "Daniel and I have had years to accept that some men are excellent providers and still limited in more personal departments." The surgeon looked down. One of the investors adjusted his cuff. I turned toward her fully then. "Lena," she met my eyes and smiled, not kindly, not even angrily, with the absolute composure of a person who thinks the story belongs to them, and then came the line, the one they'll all remember. "My husband is a good man," she said, loud enough now that the neighboring table could hear. "But if we're being honest, yes, he failed at the one thing I asked God for. There are people who think cruelty always looks wild. It doesn't. Sometimes it looks immaculate. Sometimes it wears diamonds and speaks softly. Sometimes it smiles while it lays your humiliation on a linen tablecloth and calls it honesty." I could have answered her then. God knows I had enough in my pocket to end the performance right there. The report, the notes, the portal change, everything. But something in me wanted one more thing first. Not revenge, clarity. I wanted to know whether she would stop. Whether some private part of her still remembered I was her husband. Whether she would glance at me and see the line she was crossing. She did not. Instead, she leaned back, one hand resting at the base of her throat, and said, "I suppose some women are simply asked to mourn futures while still smiling through dinner." The woman in emerald silk from earlier. I later learned her name was Nora Bell, one of the Trust's largest donors, set her glass down with a click sharp enough to be heard over the quartet. That was when I realized the room had noticed, not just our table. The room, and then, from somewhere near the ballroom entrance, I heard a voice I knew. "Daniel?" I turned. Naomi Feld stood just inside the doorway near the family housing display, speaking to a hospital board chair I recognized from previous donor briefings. For a split second, I thought I must be mistaken. Then she lifted one hand in recognition. Lena's face changed. It happened fast, but I saw it. The blood drained first, then her posture stiffened. Then something almost like fear crossed her eyes. Dr. Feld was not supposed to be there, at least not according to whatever map of the evening my wife had constructed in her head. The board chair led her closer through the crowd, Daniel, good to see you, Dr. Feld said as she reached us. I had no idea you and your wife were attending tonight. Lena. She nodded politely. Lena forced a smile so tight it looked painful. Doctor, what a surprise. The board chair, oblivious, beamed. Naomi just joined our pediatric reproductive ethics advisory panel. We're lucky to have her. You all know one another? No one answered immediately. I felt the envelope in my jacket like a second heartbeat. Then Dr. Feld looked from Lena to me and must have read enough in the air to understand this was not a casual reunion. She said carefully, Mr. Mercer, I hope you received the records you requested. At our tables, silence fell so completely I could hear the soft movement of candle flames. Lena's eyes snapped to me. Requested. Not discussed as a couple. Not shared by mutual plan. Requested by me, because I had not been given what should have been mine all along. Camille looked between us. The surgeon at our table went still. Nora Bell, the donor in emerald silk, watched with the sharp, patient attention of someone accustomed to seeing truths emerge slowly and expensively. I could have softened it then. I could have spared Lena. For years, that is what I would have done. But dignity is not the same thing as endless protection of the person harming you. And silence is not mercy when it keeps a lie alive. Yes, I said. I received everything yesterday. Lena's mouth parted slightly. Dr. Feld inclined her head, unaware still of the full shape of the room she had stepped into. I'm glad. I had been concerned the follow-up communication was incomplete. There it was. A doctor's elegant word for betrayal. Lena stood abruptly. Excuse me, she said. I think this is neither the time nor the place. And for the first time that night, her voice was not in control. But she was too late, because Camille, who loved gossip almost as much as Lena loved control, had already leaned forward. Time nor place for what? Lena shot her a look. I reached slowly into my jacket and placed the folded report packet on the table between the butter dish and the wine glasses. No drama, no slam, just paper. Truth rarely needs theatrics. I agree, I said. This was never the place. But since you made a public performance out of my supposed failure, let's at least be accurate. Lena stared at the packet like it might explode. I opened it, turned to the report I had memorized despite wishing I never had to. Then I looked not at her, but at the room she had invited into our pain. For 7 years, I said, my voice steady enough to surprise even me. My wife let friends, family in rooms like this assume that our inability to have children was because of me. I paused. She knew 11 months ago that it wasn't. Dr. Feld looked down, grim now, understanding. Lena whispered, Daniel, stop. No, that word arrived in me quietly. Not shouted. Not angry. Just, no, I said aloud. You called me a failure in public. The least we can do now is tell the truth in public too. Her face had gone almost colorless. Camille's hand covered her mouth. One investor looked like he wanted desperately to disappear. The pediatric surgeon at our table closed his eyes briefly, the way doctors sometimes do when they recognize suffering, but no, it is no longer medical. I lifted the page. According to the specialist report from 11 months ago, I said, male factor infertility was not indicated. The primary issue requiring treatment was on Lena's side. I did not read every detail. I am not cruel. I never wanted to expose her body, only her lot. Lena's chair scraped backward. Give me that, she hissed. I held her gaze. For what? To hide it again? That landed harder than anything else I could have said. Because truth is often strongest when it names the act plainly, not elegantly. Plainly, hide it again. The board chair shifted awkwardly and murmured something about giving us privacy. But Nora Bell spoke before he could move us along. No, she said, calm and cool. If Mrs. Mercer found it appropriate to humiliate her husband publicly over fertility, she can withstand hearing the correction publicly. Lena turned to her, stunned. People like Lena are used to rooms bending around confidence. What she was not used to was a room deciding she had forfeited the right to control the tone. Her eyes came back to me, tearful now, but not yet repentant. Just cornered. It wasn't like that, she said. You don't understand. And there it was. The oldest sentence in every betrayal. You don't understand. As if harm becomes moral if the person doing it felt complicated enough while doing it. Then help me, I said quietly. Understand why you changed the portal access. Understand why you asked for wording clarification. Understand why you let me stand in front of your mother, your friends, your board, and carry something that didn't belong to me. She looked around the table as if someone might save her. No one did. Her voice dropped. I was scared. I nodded once. I know. You don't know what it felt like, she said, and now the tears were real. You don't know what it feels like as a woman to have your body become a disappointment. To feel like every room sees what you can't do. To hear pity in people's voices. I let her say it. Because for the first time all evening, she was near something honest. Then I answered the part that mattered. You're right, I said. I don't know what that feels like in your body. But I know exactly what it feels like to have that disappointment assigned to me by the person who was supposed to love me most. Her lower lip trembled. You think I wanted to hurt you? I almost laughed then, not from humor but from exhaustion. Lena, I said. Wanting matters less after years of choosing it anyway. The quartet had stopped playing. I hadn't even noticed when. The whole ballroom had subtly shifted its attention toward us in that way elegant rooms do. Not staring openly, just listening with all their bodies. And then, just when I thought the worst of the truth had already arrived, another voice came from behind us. Daniel. I turned and saw my sister Claire. She had come late from O'Hare after a delayed flight from Boston, and must have arrived while all this was unfolding. She was still wearing her black wool coat over her dress, hair wind-tossed, eyes scanning my face first and the table second. Claire knew about the records. She was the only person I had shown the packet to before tonight, not because I needed backup, because every man reaches a point where he needs at least one person to look at the evidence and tell him he's not losing his mind. She came around the table and stood beside me. Do you want me here? She asked softly. I nodded. Lena closed her eyes like this somehow was worse. Claire looked at the packet, then at Lena. I hoped he'd be wrong, she said, when he called me. I really did, Claire. Lena whispered. Claire said, not tonight. Not after what I just walked into. My sister had never been dramatic. She taught 4th grade in Cambridge and spent most of her life making hard things comprehensible to children. But there was steel in her when it counted. The kind that sounds almost gentle until you realize it does not move. I sat with Daniel in his office yesterday while he read those notes, she said, and I watched my brother, a man who spent years blaming himself for something he didn't do, realize his own wife had protected herself by letting him live inside that shame. Lena covered her face, briefly with one hand. Please stop. Claire didn't. That's not fear, Lena. Fear is telling the truth and being afraid of what comes after. What you did was strategy. If this had ended there, it would have been enough. More than enough. But the deepest truths rarely arrive alone. Because from the moment Dr. Feld walked into that ballroom, another thread in my mind had started pulling tight. The pamphlet, the phone call, the secrecy. The phrase Lena had used the night before. Tomorrow will tell me what I need to know. I looked at her then and asked the question I had not planned to ask publicly. Who were you talking to last night? She looked up sharply. I saw it in her eyes before she spoke. Not confusion. Calculation. Nobody. That's not true. Daniel, who were you talking to? The room changed again. Subtly, but enough. Because suddenly this was no longer only about a report. It was about whether the lie had been a shield or a bridge to another life. Lena swallowed. Camille stared openly now. Claire went very still beside me. Answer him, Nora Bell said. Lena turned toward her, furious for the first time. This is none of your business. Nora's expression did not change. You made it our business when you chose your husband's humiliation as dinner conversation. I cannot explain exactly why I asked what I asked next. Maybe because somewhere in me, the truth had already taken shape and only needed language. Was there someone else? Lena did not answer quickly enough. That's all the answer a marriage sometimes needs. The silence after my question was not confusion. It was recognition spreading across a room, one face at a time. She looked at the packet, at the candles, at me, and then, too softly, she said, It wasn't what you think. I closed my eyes once, not from heartbreak. From the tiredness that comes when reality finally matches the suspicion your dignity had been trying not to form. Claire inhaled sharply. Camille whispered, Oh my God, Doctor. Feld looked away entirely. How long? I asked. Daniel, please. How long? Tears slid down her face now. 6 months. The number landed strangely. Not because it was larger than I expected. Because of how cleanly she said it once she had crossed into truth. 6 months. 6 months of donor pamphlets, private calls, altered access, public humiliation, and whatever future she had already begun rehearsing in her head. With who? She shook her head. No, I almost let it go. Truly, I did, because infidelity is ugly enough without naming it in a room designed for children's charity and public virtue. But then she said the one thing she should not have said. I was lonely. Lonely. As if loneliness had arrived from nowhere. As if it had not been cultivated in the marriage by 1,000 small cruelties, strategic silences, withheld truths, and private contempt. As if my body had simply failed her, and all the rest had followed naturally. I looked at her and said, very quietly, no, you were dishonest. Loneliness came later, after you made a home for it. Sometimes calm is the sharpest weapon in the room. Lena sat down hard. No one touched her. No one comforted her. And it occurred to me then, with a sadness I had not expected, that whatever love had once lived between us was not ending in this ballroom. It had ended long before. What was ending now was only the costume. The room began to murmur. People not at our table had sensed enough by then to understand the outline, if not the details. The board chair moved toward the stage in the hopeful, futile way men do when they think a microphone and a schedule can repair moral damage. But before the evening could fully reassemble itself, one final truth came looking for the light. Nora Bell turned to me. Daniel, she said, I owe you an apology. I frowned slightly. For what? For not recognizing you sooner. Lena looked up. Nora continued, her voice carrying more than she probably intended. My late husband and I have funded family housing through Bright Futures for years. Last spring, when the trust was facing a shortfall, an anonymous donor quietly covered not only the gap but the next 3 years of operating support. We were told only this week that the donor had agreed to be acknowledged privately tonight, if attendance allowed. She paused. Your legal name is Daniel Mercer, isn't it? I said nothing for a second. Then, yes, there was a shift through the room like wind moving across tall grass. Lena stared. Camille blinked. The investors looked at me with new eyes. Not because I wanted that, but because some people only understand character once it has a ledger attached. Nora's expression softened. The family suites on the 7th floor, she said. The temporary apartments for parents who can't afford to stay near their sick children. That was you. I had not planned for that to come out. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. It was never mine to perform. But in some strange, painful way, it felt right that if my wife had publicly reduced my worth to what my body had not given her, the room should also know what my life had quietly given others. Yes, I said. That was me. No triumph came with it, only a different kind of ache. Because for years I had wanted so badly to become a father, and when that dream began to disappear, I found myself unable to walk away from families for whom parenthood had become a hospital corridor, a plastic pull-out chair, and a fear they could not afford. So I gave there, quietly, not to replace anything, not to look noble, because pain, if it does not make you smaller, sometimes teaches you where to be useful. Lena's face folded then in a way I had never seen, not polished grief, not social tears, recognition. She had spent years calling me inadequate while never once seeing what I had become in the ruins of that inadequacy. I didn't know, she whispered, and that, more than anything else, felt like the true autopsy of our marriage. Not the affair, not the report, not even the lie. Just that simple, fatal sentence I didn't know. Of course she didn't. She had been too busy preserving a version of herself to learn the man standing beside her. Claire touched my arm, softly enough to remind me I was still in my body, still in the room, still free to decide how this ended. I looked at Lena for a long time. 9 years of marriage, 7 years of trying, 11 months of documented deceit, 6 months of betrayal. And underneath all of it, a man I barely recognized anymore, the version of me who had once thought being loved and being useful were the same thing. I felt no urge to destroy her. That's the part people never understand about real endings. By the time they arrive, rage has often burned itself out and left only clarity behind. What happens now? Lena asked. Not to me, exactly. To the air, to the consequences, to the future she could suddenly see collapsing around her. I answered anyway. Now, I said, you stop telling my story for me. Then I closed the packet. Not with force, just finality. Claire stood with me. Around us, the room slowly remembered itself. Silverware, candlelight, soft shoes on carpet, donors pretending they had not just watched a marriage tell the truth in front of pediatric surgeons and philanthropists. Lena reached for my sleeve, the same way she had once reached for my hand in doctors' offices, in church pews, at family funerals. Gestures that looked intimate from a distance and meant something far more conditional up close. "Daniel, please, not like this." I looked down at her hand on my jacket and then back at her face. "How else has it ever been?" I asked. She let go. I turned to Dr. Feld. "I'm sorry you were dragged into this." Her face was kind now in that restrained, professional way. "You weren't the one who dragged me," she said. Norabelle stepped aside to give us room, but before I passed, she said quietly, "For what it's worth, Mr. Mercer, children aren't the only evidence a man was built to father something." I nodded once. It was a generous thing to say, and maybe the first thing that night that landed as comfort instead of correction. Claire and I walked toward the ballroom doors together. Behind us, I heard Lena say my name once, not loudly, not theatrically, just once. I did not turn back. There is a kind of mercy in refusing to witness someone else's collapse when you no longer need it to validate your own survival. The hotel corridor outside was dimmer, quieter, lined with framed black and white photos of old Chicago and brass sconces that gave the walls a soft amber glow. For a second, I stood there breathing like a man who had just surfaced from underwater. Claire said nothing. Bless her for that. Some griefs do not need language immediately. They need a hallway, an elevator, a long silence, and a night air cold enough to remind you that your body is still yours. Outside, State Street glittered with wet reflections from a rain that had started while we were inside. Taxis moved past in yellow streaks. A couple laughed beneath an umbrella. Somewhere down the block, a saxophone player under the awning of a closed storefront let out a line of music so lonely and beautiful it sounded almost scripted. Claire finally spoke as we waited for the valet. "Are you okay?" I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because no answer that honest fits neatly inside that question. "I think," I said slowly, "I've been less okay than I realized for a very long time." She nodded. "That sounds about right. The valet brought my car around." Claire offered to call a ride, but I told her to come home with me first. She hesitated, then agreed the way older sisters agree when they know I'm fine means don't leave yet. The drive north was mostly quiet. Chicago at night has a way of making even heartbreak look architectural. Bridges lit from beneath, wet pavement reflecting old stone buildings. The lake just beyond the dark line of high-rises, invisible and enormous. At one red light, Claire looked over and said, "Did you ever really believe it was you?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Yes," I said. "For how long?" I thought about that. Long enough for it to shape me. She nodded again and looked out the window. That was Claire's gift, not fixing what could only be witnessed. When we got to the house, I unlocked the front door and felt immediately how empty it already was, even though Lena's things were still there. A house can know before its owners admit it. Claire put the kettle on because that is what women in my family do when they don't trust words to hold a room together. I went to my office, opened the bottom drawer, and took out a small cedar box Lena had never noticed. Inside were things I had kept over the years, not because I was sentimental, but because grief likes evidence. A tiny pair of gray knitted baby socks my mother had mailed us after year 2, just to keep for hope. A Polaroid of the spare room before we repainted it back into a guest room. A penciled list of names Lena and I once liked, folded into quarters and softened at the edges from being opened too many times. And beneath those, something I had not looked at in over a year. An adoption information packet. I sat down with it in my hands and felt something inside me break open gently, not violently. Because even before the truth about the report, even before the affair, there had been a point in our marriage where I had quietly begun to imagine fatherhood in forms Lena no longer wanted to discuss. I had attended one informational session alone, never told her, not because I planned to go behind her back, because I already knew, somewhere down in the part of me that notices load-bearing cracks, that she did not want a child unless the child came in the exact image of her original story. And I wanted to love somebody enough to raise them well. Blood had started to matter less to me than the chance to be needed honestly. Lena once found that packet and asked what it was. When I told her, she said, "I'm not ready to settle for consolation prizes. I threw nothing back at her then. I just put the packet away. There are sentences that should end a marriage the moment they are spoken. Most don't. Not because they aren't grave enough, because the person hearing them still believes love can outwork contempt. Claire stood in the doorway of the office holding 2 mugs. Her eyes dropped to the packet in my hands. Oh, Danny, only my sister still called me that. I looked up. I think this might be the part that hurts most. She set the mugs down and came around behind me, one hand resting briefly on my shoulder. Not because she lied? No, I said. Because even after everything, I still wanted to be a father. I kept protecting the dream longer than I protected myself. The clock over the bookshelf ticked. The house settled. Rain tapped lightly at the back windows. Claire said, "That isn't weakness. It feels like it isn't." I turned the packet over in my hands. You know what the worst part is? She waited. I kept thinking if I stayed calm enough, patient enough, useful enough, she'd eventually choose tenderness. Like love was a reward for endurance. Claire leaned against the desk. Daniel, some people don't become kinder because you absorb more. They become more comfortable. That sentence stayed with me. More comfortable, yes. That was exactly what had happened. My silence had not healed our marriage. It had subsidized its dishonesty. By midnight, Claire had settled in the guest room, and I was alone in the kitchen with the overhead light dimmed low. I took the report packet back out and read it one last time. Not because I doubted it, because I needed to let the truth settle in plain language. Not a real man. Failure. Inadequate. Those words had structured entire years of my interior life. And all along, the document in front of me said otherwise. I thought about every family dinner, every prayer, every pitying look, every private apology I had made to Lena for not being enough. I thought about how often men are taught to carry shame quietly, because it looks more dignified than pain. And I wondered how many of us are walking around loyal to stories that were written over us by people too frightened to bear their own reflection. My phone lit up just after 1 in the morning. Lena. I let it ring out. Then a text arrived. Please let me explain. I never meant for it to go this far. A second one. I was ashamed. Then I was trapped in it. Then I didn't know how to undo it without losing everything. I stared at the screen. What is marriage if not the place where 2 people are supposed to risk truth before performance? Ashamed. Trapped. Didn't know how to undo it. All of that might even have been true. And still none of it changed what she had done with my name, my body, my dignity, my hope. I typed nothing back. Some responses do not belong to midnight. Some belong to lawyers. Some belong to silence. And some belong only to the changed life that follows. The next morning, Chicago woke under a pale gray sky and the kind of cold that makes porch railings sting your palm. I stood in the backyard with a mug of coffee and watched a line of geese cut low over the roofs beyond ours. Claire came out wrapped in my old college sweatshirt and leaned against the doorframe. You sleep? A little. She looked at me carefully. What do you know now that you didn't know yesterday? I thought about that, then answered honestly. I know I wasn't failing, I said. I was being used as the explanation. That mattered, more than I can explain. Because when you've lived under a false verdict long enough, innocence doesn't feel triumphant, it feels disorienting. Like being told the limp you built your whole stride around was never your injury in the first place. Claire sipped her coffee. What are you going to do? Tell the truth where it matters. Quietly. Completely, she nodded. That sounds like you. It used to be the part of me she counted on. And now, I looked out at the bare trees. Now it's the part of me she doesn't get to weaponize anymore. By noon, Lena had not come home. By evening, she had. I heard her key in the lock while I was at the dining table reviewing notes from an attorney Claire had recommended. When she entered, she looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Socially. Like the version of herself built to move through gala rooms had not survived the parking garage, the hotel corridor, the daylight. Her makeup